Well, thank you. Well, let's get started because it's 6:03. Seb, it is so lovely to have you on. Thank you, everyone who has joined us for the 8th annual, but first ever virtual Up2Us Gala. We are so excited to be here with you. I want to take this opportunity to introduce our fabulous and esteemed guest, Sebastian Coe, who is president of IAF World Athletics, the Pro Chancellor at Loughborough University. He has set 12 world records in middle distance track events, a 4-time Olympic medalist for Team Great Britain, 2 gold and 2 silver. And following his retirement from athletics, he was a member of Parliament for the Conservative Party from 1992 to 1997 for Falmouth and Cornwall. He's a member of the IAAF Hall of Fame and currently is on the International Olympic Committee and is working hard for Tokyo and all of the athletes who will participate this year. Welcome.
Thank you, Sydney. By the way, the choice of music in the warm-up to this was pretty good.
Was it good? I will let them know. I didn't.
It was, yeah, somebody's curated well.
I will have to let them know. I only got to hear a smidgen of it, but I wish I could have heard.
I'm probably showing my age because a lot of it seemed to be sort of 70s, but hey.
Hey, I like the 70s. I think that's a great music genre. Well, Sam, let's get down to brass tacks. There are lots of questions that people want to know about you, about coaching, about your experience specifically as an Olympic medalist and the work that you've been doing with the International Olympic Committee too. So the first question I want to ask you specifically about your experience as an athlete, what role do you think coaches played in your success as an Olympic athlete?
Oh, Sydney, I owe everything to coaches. Any athlete that's sitting in the, anybody you could have been interviewing today that's had a, semi-credible career, it should be paying massive, massive tribute to coaches. And it's not just the fact that they help you, run quicker or shift the boat quicker or pedal faster. It's that they also good coaches create a structure through which you, for the rest of your life, will make sensible decisions. So it's not just about coaching. The great role of coaches is that their influence lasts way, way beyond the curtilage of the stadium. It's not just about the field of play. It's a great coach will help set the scene for the rest of your life.
Most definitely. And a little bird told me that one of your coaches had a very special role in your life, that not just as a coach and an athlete, but possibly something a little different too. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
My father was my main coach. We started pretty much on the same day. We retired together pretty much on the same day. I wasn't the only athlete he coached. He coached other he coached other Olympic medalists. But I always remember him being asked at the end of his career, whether he was prouder about being my coach or my father. And he said, oh, no, definitely his coach, because anybody can be a father, but no, not everybody can be a great coach. So I think he was pretty honest about that. But no, it was a relationship that worked because we trusted each other. And it had its challenges, but by and large, it's when it does work well, it works.
My dad was my coach when I was about this tall, and that was where that relationship started and ended in terms of coaching. So I'm glad.
Hey, Sydney, I wouldn't even attempt to teach my kids how to drive, let alone coach them. So it's given to very few people.
Oh, most definitely. And those who are good at it stick with it, and they do a great job. Olympic medalists like you.
No, coaching is a calling. Great coaches, they're naturals. They're great psychologists. They really understand. I think great coaches understand more about the people they're working with than necessarily the technology of what they're trying to impart.
Most definitely. So you mentioned a little earlier about the fact that great coaching gives you the structure to succeed later in life. And I think that's a really important topic because we oftentimes think that a coaching relationship starts and ends on and off the field or on the track. What kind of lessons did you learn and what kind of structures did you take into your life after being an athlete? What did that look like for you?
Great question, Sydney. Great question. I think it was a really good question. I'm not just saying it because you're sitting there. Look, if I look back at pretty much everything I went on to do after my athletics, I think I learned from the coaching structure that I had around me. My father wasn't the only person in the structure. He was, if you like, he was the chief executive, but he did put some really smart people around me. And most of them were Americans, because at that stage, the physiology, which in Europe was a sort of rather dry academic subject, in the US in the 60s and certainly by the 70s, it was being practically applied to human performance in sport. And that's why he pulled the talent that we had that came to the team. So, for instance, my physiologist was a great guy, sadly no longer with us, the professor of cardiopulmonary science at Georgia State, Dr. David Martin, who was also in charge of the endurance, the Olympic Endurance Center up in Colorado Springs. One of my other coaches was a high school coach out of Chicago, a legendary high school coach, a guy called Joe Newton, won 26 Illinois virtually straight cross-country titles with his schools. He was the first high school coach to become an Olympic coach. So we really had a great team behind me. And I think what I took from that period was that what they were all really good at was sharing. They had a shared vision, they had a shared purpose. And it was a great purpose because I was the beneficiary of it. They spent most of their waking hours, and probably a lot of the time they should have been sleeping, figuring out how I could become a world record holder, how I could win Olympic medals. And looking back, what they actually did is they just removed all the difficulties, all the inhibitors in my life that would have stopped me from delivering my best performance, not the year of the competition or the month or even the week or day or even the 10 minutes, but the moment I stepped on the line. And I was really lucky because I walked out in a competition knowing I wasn't always going to win, but somebody had to be really good and have better coaches, and there weren't better coaches around. So it gave me great confidence. And I think when I put teams together for the Olympic Games and in world athletics, I think the lesson I learned from that was find the best people you can. They've got to be world class. They've got to be best in class. And when you do find them, trust them to get on with the job. Don't micromanage them. Don't sit on their shoulders, but create an environment where you remove all the inhibitors so they can do the best work without worrying about some of the things that you can take off their stresses and strains. And it was all, I sort of absorbed all that. My time with my father and the backroom team that worked with me really for the best part of a decade.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, I do want to ask you about that because you've had experiences with coaches being coached, and I'm sure you've had experiences working with athletes who are currently being coached by others. A lot of things have changed in terms of sports, from all of the science and kinesiology, all of that kind of stuff. And coaching itself has almost changed. But what have you noticed that maybe has stayed the same through it all?
The great coaches are really consistent. They're emotionally consistent. They are punctual. They're there. They're 24/7. And that's the one thing that defines great coaches. Okay, they have more data. They have more information. They have more technology at hand. They certainly have the ability to get athletes back into competition quicker after injury. There are injuries that we used to have that would take maybe 6, 7, 10 weeks to recover. Now you've got diagnostics that can give you clues as to what the problem is, and you can start treating overnight. And injuries that took weeks to recover are now, a matter of hours, sometimes only days. I'm involved with well, I'm biased. It's the best football club in Europe because we've just won the Champions League. So I work with Chelsea. We've got players at Chelsea who can have keyhole surgery and be playing in Premier League football, 6 or 7 days later. Whereas 30, 40 years ago, that might have even been career threatening. So you've got a lot more information. You've got a lot more technology. But I think coaching is more difficult now because you have to be much more aware of the way the world has changed for young people. You have to be very careful in your language. You have to be really aware now about safeguarding issues. You have to be very, very conscious about the welfare of athletes. It's a more complicated landscape. So coaching now, I think, is tougher than it's ever been but it still has an essential role. And look, I'm biased about this. I think coaches are the real social workers in our communities. And I just wish people, probably even governments, understood what is going on at a community level 24/7. Actually, as we're talking, Sydney, there are coaches, male and female, all ages, working their magic in some of the toughest neighborhoods in the world.
Most definitely. And the work that they do is always incredible. I would love to hear about a challenge that maybe you've encountered with coaches or that you've heard of coaches taking on, and how did they overcome that obstacle? And how do you suggest young coaches especially overcome those difficult challenges that are sure to rear their ugly heads?
Look, there are lots of challenges in coaching. I think the one we talked about a few moments ago, the landscape for young people is very different. Young people, in a way, are much more inquiring. They're going to question, and coaches, good coaches, will accept that as being part of the landscape. You do also now have the issues I talked around about safeguarding and welfare, but there's another one. And this is what great coaching is also about. The ability to get hold of, say, a young athlete at the age of 11 or 12, and not just impart information, not just talk about interval training or speed endurance or weight training, or if it's in field events, the angle of entry into a high jump, or, blocking out in shot put, or throwing a javelin effectively with the biomechanics of that. You've got to do that. But what good coaches are also going to do is to impart implicitly amongst young people that there are ways of doing things properly, with integrity in sport, and there are ways of doing them badly. And good coaches are really going to be effectively steering the athletes. Maybe it's away from performance-enhancing drugs. Maybe it's away from illegal gambling. Maybe it's the things that, can trip athletes up. And it's not just about being banned from the sport. Those are the sorts of things that are going to follow athletes throughout the rest of their career. They can't suddenly get rid of them on a CV, and because of social media, they're going to follow them now. Everything's digital, so it's going to follow them through their career. So the role of coaching now, particularly in the era of social media, is 100% more challenging than it probably was 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah, you mentioned how the role of coaches can really get in, especially at that age of 11 to 12, and trying to steer kids and youth in the right direction. And coaches can really have a positive impact. And just recently, we talked about how coaches being involved in community programs in underserved and underfunded communities can have such a positive impact. How do you foresee the role of coaches moving forward in those communities? And what can people working in those communities focus on to have a greater positive impact?
Well, look, I was a working politician for a time, and for a short period of time, a government minister. This, I'm afraid, is down to funding. And if local communities have the right priorities, they will be funding coaching. They will be funding coaching, particularly in areas where you've got destabilized communities, and you've got communities that are really economically and socially under challenge. It's the best investment. Politicians, if you're on this call, it is the best investment you will ever make in great coaching and in youth schemes and youth programs. So, in a way, the future of coaching outside of, national Olympic committees and our big professional ball teams, where great, and athletics, where, coaches tend to be paid, reasonably well. We've got to be really more conscious about community coaches that are often doing this. They're balancing family life, they're balancing other careers. They're probably making sacrifices in those careers to be able to spend the amount of time doing, coaching at grassroots level. And it's really important that the political structures around the world recognize the true worth of coaching, because it'll pay off. It'll pay off with interest.
I couldn't agree with you more. I do want to shift gears a little bit as we head into
the next point I would make is, next time you are confronted by a politician asking for your vote. Ask them what they're going to do to encourage more young people into sport, physical activity, and what is the infrastructure they're going to put around them. See how they answer, and if they don't answer well, don't vote for them.
We do have a mayoral candidate election coming up in New York City, so that is going to be a question that I will have to ask. But I do want to shift gears just slightly, because I know that you have been working very closely because you're on the International Olympic Committee. A lot of people have had a lot of thoughts about Tokyo. If you're like me, you're very excited for the Tokyo Olympics. And I do want to ask your thoughts on the challenges of executing a historic event of this size during a worldwide pandemic.
Look, it's a real challenge. You know, none of us saw this coming. Look, I chaired the London Organising Committee. I can only imagine what would have been going through my head if somebody knocked on the door of my office in March or April of 2012 and said, oh, by the way, your opening ceremony is not the 27th of July this year. You're going 1 year later in 2013. I mean, the mind boggles at what the challenge, which I know, but it's hard enough to put a games on without having to mothball everything for an extra year and rebuild your teams and figure out all the contracts and all the commercial challenges around that. You know, a village, you know, in a modern games is normally handed on to local housing communities or developers. That's all had to be mothballed. Venues that go to other legacy tenants, that's had to be. So look, I've only touched the edge of the challenge. And of course, the big challenge that has been confronted by the Tokyo Organizing Committee is how do you, at the same time, create an environment where it is safe for the athletes to travel and to be in the village, but at the same time, be really careful about the communities and caring for the communities that are going to be hosting those championships. So the one thing, I guess I'm slightly privileged because as a member of the Coordination Commission for the Tokyo Games, I see cumulatively the thousands of hours of thought and forensic detail that has gone into making sure that these games will be safe and secure. But look, we have to be realistic about this. It is understandable that we all have families, we have children, we have grandchildren, we have relatives, some are elderly, some are going to be vulnerable. You know, we've all been through those experiences. So I'm not surprised that the people of Japan have had some nervousness about this. I think what they should take comfort from is, and I can say this on behalf of World Athletics, you know, we've got really very good now about staging events and doing it safely. We had the World Relay Championships just a few months ago in Poland. Okay, fewer teams because not everybody was able to travel, but we had 750 athletes, not one positive test. We've also, you know, even in an interrupted year, we've staged 600 events globally, including 2 world championships, and not one of them has been a super spreader. So I think the message for more broadly is, look, the world has to keep moving. And the Olympic Games is really important. And it's important for one really sobering statistic, Sydney. 70% of the athletes that are going to go to an Olympic Games only have one shot at this. Now, I was really lucky. I had 2. But 70%, if we don't make the effort, really don't make the effort to get these games off and up and running securely and safely, both for the athletes and for the communities that are going to house them, then those athletes, 70% of those athletes are never going to go back to a games. And I really think it's worth fighting. You know, I've been an athlete. I'm doing all my roles in sport now through the eyes of an athlete. That's the only reason I'm doing it. I get up each morning to try and create opportunities for athletes. I don't do it to wear a blazer, as you can probably see. So the issue for us is really to reassure the people of Tokyo that we take their welfare really very seriously, and no games, actually probably no event of any significance in the last 30 or 40 years will have been delivered with so much collective forethought about how to do it safely and securely.
Most definitely. And I think this ties into my next question. The Olympics for so many people symbolizes so much more than just a collection of games and athletes and patriotism. I'd like to ask you what the Olympics symbolizes for you, because I know it's all about making sure things are safe and the welfare of athletes and giving them that chance that's so important. But if you had to say that the Olympics symbolizes something for you, what would that be?
Well, it would be a personal answer, Sydney, because the games changed my life. I saw something on television years and years ago. It was an Olympic Games. I joined a local athletics club. The two athletes in my city of Sheffield, I was brought up in a northern industrial city in the UK, famous for steel and mining and cutlery. And I joined an athletics club when I saw the extraordinary nature of what those two athletes did. They were from my own city. They won medals. They came into the school. I joined the athletics club. The rest is history. So what I know is that if you create big moments in the formative lives of young people, whether it's in music, whether it's in arts, whether it's in sciences, whether it's culturally based, whether it is, just you will change the way they see the world. And that was the day I saw the world in a different way. So I won the Olympic Games, not just because I think it is a fantastic celebration of humanity and sport at its highest level. And let's not forget the Paralympic Games as well, because that is spirit lifting as well. But I want the games to be creating opportunities, not just in sport, but in culture, in media. The one thing about London was that we wanted to drive legacy wherever it was possible through the opening ceremony, with maybe more young people taking up musical instruments or dance, or just pursuing their passions. And I think the Olympic Games can do that. I would also say, you tell me another event in the world that comes together in such an extraordinary way, celebrating the ambitions and aspirations of young people. And in a world that is driven by division in large parts of its public discourse and political leaders that are very loose with their language, I think that it is really important that sport can be seen to take the front foot on all this. And sport, like nothing else, has the ability to bring communities together at a local and an international level.
Most definitely. And I remember watching the 2012 opening ceremony of the Olympics and was absolutely blown away and fell in love with it. And that's when I really started just watching it every time the Olympics came around. So I do want to take this opportunity, with only 5 minutes left in our session, to open it up to anyone in the room who would like to ask a question. You can either use the chat function or the Q&A function. I prefer the chat function because then I can just look at it, and that's pretty easy for me. So if you have any questions for Lord Sebastian Coe, please put them in the chat function now.
Sydney, they can call me Seb. They don't need all the others.
See, I was saying that I just wanted to say Lord Sebastian Coe.
Okay, that's
cool, But please go ahead and add your chat questions if you have any. We talked about everything from coaching in the community to the importance of coaches for young people and creating a positive world for them. We talked about the Olympics and how exciting it is to create the Olympics and all of the important and positive things that come of it. We will give people a minute to ask any questions. But as we're waiting for people to ask, oh, great. Hillary asks, how do you feel sports or the Olympics has changed the world for women?
Look, I think one of the biggest impacts that global sport has had and through the Olympic Games, has been on the empowerment of women. I chair within my own sport, and I'm really proud to chair it, the Gender Leadership Task Force, where we are finding programs and pathways for more young women to come into our sport, not just competitively, but as technical officials and as administrators. And we've fallen behind in sport. We really should have done a better job. In my own sport of athletics, it's 50-50 on the field of play. There's not an event a man does that a woman doesn't do or can't do. Our prize money is level, but we still don't have enough women in positions of responsibility. I changed the constitution of my own sport to make it constitutionally illegal for us to have any governance structure by 2027 that is not 50-50 in terms of gender balance. And I don't mean just in a handful of countries. I mean across the sport. So if you go back to the Olympic Games, if you look at the impact of somebody like Mildred Didrikson, Babe Didrikson, back in the 1932 games in Los Angeles, or Fanny Blankers-Koen, the great Dutch athlete that won a sack full of medals in 1948, or latterly into my own era, Renia Shawinska, the great Polish athlete. The impact, Wyomir Tyus in the US as well. If you look at the impact that women have made on the Olympic movement, it's gone way, way beyond empowerment in sport. The Fanny Blankers-Koen in 1948 destroyed the myth that women weren't physically or mentally wired to compete at the highest level. And she is still the iconic image of those games, and went on to change attitudes towards women in the workplace, in sport, in community. So the Olympic movement has been, I think, a great driver of change and gender balance in sport, and long may it continue to do that.
Most definitely. I do want to end on this great question that we got from Leo Quesada, who asks, what advice would you give to a young coach who is soon to be a head coach of people who are older than he is?
That's always a challenge, isn't it? But it works. It works. I've seen coaches work with great influence and great diligence. And look, it doesn't really matter what age your charges are. They can be older, they can be younger. You still have to gain their respect. Nothing great in coaching, as everybody will tell you, happens overnight. It's a long, steady apprenticeship, and you learn by success, but you also learn probably as much from those moments that don't go that successfully. But it will always be about trust and emotional continuity. And great coaching, whether you're working with young people or experienced people, is really about being there at the neediest moments for them. So good luck, and it's a great opportunity, and I'm sure you'll be very successful. But take your time. Don't believe it's going to happen overnight. Trust. The Dutch have a great expression, and I'm probably badly translating it, but trust comes on foot and leaves in a taxi. So it's really important that you get your teams and those athletes you're working with to trust you, and being emotionally consistent in coaching, I think, is really important.
Most definitely. Well, thank you so much, Seb. It was a pleasure getting to talk with you. Thank you to everyone who joined this session. Now we would like to encourage all of our guests to head back to the main stage tab, where we resume our programming and enjoy a live DJ set before Sandra comes back to introduce the next segment. See you all there.
Congratulations. Great initiative.
Thank you, Seb. It was lovely to talk to you.
And you, Sydney, you take care. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. You too. Have a good one.
Thank you.